The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, see everything we do. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Plein Air and Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. We got a special treat for you today because it's a brand new video, never before seen. As a matter of fact, it's just releasing today. This one is called Still Life with Palette Knife with the great Cynthia Rosen.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Rosen. I came in from Vermont and I'm here going to paint a still life that's over here. We've sort of set up what was available and I'm going to show you how I will interpret it. My work tends to be more colorful rather than representative, so I take great license and you'll see how that goes. I wear these, they're actually called great art gloves, and they are great art gloves. They're wonderful. The only thing you cannot do with them is control the cell phone. But use them once, use them twice, throw them in the washing machine, use them another 10 times, so forth and so on. So I'm going to use those to set up. I'm going to set up my palette. I use two whites. I use zinc white and titanium. As I paint, you'll learn why. My palette basically consists of Prussian blue, which I stick in this top corner. When you paint, you always lay your paints out in the same order and don't be stingy with them. The most frustrating thing is to look for a color and not have it, or mix a color and use it up and need to find the same mix of colors. This is purple dioxazine. I use Gamblin paints. I'm a palette knife painter. And I find for working with the knife, Gamblin paints have the best consistency. They're stiff enough that they hold. And they work well. So purple dioxazine, then I put out alizarin crimson. Now I'm looking for my cad red. Here, my cad red medium. We'll go with cad orange. I have a transparent orange, which is a wonderful color, but I only use occasionally. My normal palette, you will see. Then I go cobalt blue. I tend to keep my cooler colors on the left of my palette and run my warmer colors across the top. Cad yellow medium. And either cad light, yellow light, or Hansa yellow. I'm going to make use of my larger tubes as much as I can, since they're the heaviest to be carrying on these different planes. I prefer to use zinc white as my mixing white, and that's really the intent of it. I've heard from a number of people that it's unstable. I've checked with manufacturers. Actually, it's not that bad as long as you mix it with another color. So this is my mixing white. It allows for the true nature of the color that I'm using to come through. So I'm going to put several dots of zinc white on. And here's my titanium white, which I'm going to put in my bottom corner. This painting, or this still life, I'm sorry, has a lot of white in it. So I'm using far more white. I'm laying out far more white than I normally do. There's another color that I love. I don't always use it on my palette, and that's Portland gray. It's also a Gamblin color. It's a bit of a shortcut color. It's not that you can't make it, you can. So it's not a primary. About a week ago, I did a demo and a private lesson for somebody using cobalt blue, cad red medium, and cad yellow medium. And on Facebook, I juxtaposed it next to a painting in which I had a full palette to see who could tell which painting was done with a full palette versus a limited palette. There are some tools that a number of painters use. One is the composition finder. Hey, the nice thing about it is you can take a look at the shape of your canvas, if it's a vertical, horizontal, if it's square, and then you can take a look at your composition and determine what's the best composition for you to use. Another tool used, which I don't tend to use, my eyes just don't perceive it very well, is a red screen, and you hold it up and you look at values. I find the red distracting, but a lot of painters make use of it. And if you're a new painter, I just brought what's called a color wheel. It's something you may want to invest in just to help you understand colors, color mixing, what happens when you add shades of white. To introduce composition, I want to introduce how we see. There was an independent scholar who studied the anthropological and cultural beginnings of art. And her name's Ellen Dissanayake. And she talks about when we were living in caves and as we became more and more erect, this became a horizon line. That's it. In our brain, we all understand that. This is sky, this is earth. Okay? When we see something, we automatically interpret it that way. It's a common language amongst all people. So, I'm going to say if I'm looking at this still life, and I want to talk about the still life, or if I'm looking at a figure, and I want to talk about the figure, and if I put the figure in the middle of my page, well, I'm not really talking about the figure. I'm talking about the space around it. Because in order to talk about the figure, you're probably better off having the figure large, taking up the space. Okay, head, shoulders, arm. Everything's a matter of shapes. Okay? Simple shapes. A box that can become a house. Everything is shapes. Okay? That we perceive as a circle, or if we put this on it, it becomes the sun. If we put two eyes on it, it becomes a face. It's all the common language. It's all part of your composition. Here, rectangle with a circle on it. What is it? It's a figure, okay? A smaller one, a figure further away, unless they're right next to it. Maybe it's a child. We can add legs. We can add arms. Everything is simple shapes. But basically what you want to do is to have the subject of what you're doing become a major part of your page. Most plein air painters will go out, or a lot of them, and start with a sketch. Or, in the case of the still life, I'm going to do this vertically, and I'm going to sketch it in. Once again, simple shapes. The next step for a lot of more traditional painters is something called a notan. And the notan will take these shapes. I'll just use this one since it's right next to it. Turn this vertically. And say, okay, what's our blackest blacks? We're going to break this into lights and darks. Okay, same composition, and my blackest black is here. Coming off the side. I have a lot of dark here. And actually here. Now it does filter in. I'm going to do, this is called a value study, basically. I'm going to add grays. This gray feeds into the black. Actually, it looks more like a silver. I thought it was going to be a gray. Sorry about that. And off to the side, and up here. I will put the black back in. So that's basically a value study of what we're going to paint. Okay? Now, on a canvas with paint, I'm going to take that one step further. This is just Arches oil paper. It works for studies. In all honesty, if you want to use it, my suggestion is to take a clear gesso over it, or even gesso it, because it absorbs the oil very quickly. This is Gamsol Galkid Mix. It's the solvent I use. And I'm going to use Prussian blue to do my sketch. Okay. See, it's already absorbed that blue, so I can't get my dark as I'd like it to be. Do this quicker. Okay, I'm blocking in the basic shapes. Shadow from the vase. This has a little bit of value. Okay. A lot of painters will start with a stained canvas. I do, and I'll show you how. But now, if you're not sure of the value of something, squint your eyes. Step back, take a look. Okay? The way I would start, and I will show you on a real canvas, is I always stain my board with an orange-red color. See, you'll see on my canvas. Now I use ampersand gesso boards when I paint. I find for the palette knife they're the best. I'm stealing a bunch of my warm colors here. You can pretend that this is solid. You'll see it in my final painting. And I would then go with a brush and I'd say, okay, dynamics of the painting. What I like are the dynamics. My paintings sometimes border on abstraction. Same composition, but what I'm interested in is I'm going to push the dynamics. The other thing about composition is you want the viewer to come into your painting. In the States, we read left to right. In the Western world, we read left to right. Our eyes, at a distance, we may see the entire painting, but as we read a painting, we usually come in on the left side. There are lots of guidelines about composition, many of which I tend not to believe in, except the one that you don't want to push your viewer off the page. You don't want to have something blocking their entry, like a wall here. You want them to be able to come into the page. You want them to move around. You will find when I apply paint, I'm constantly moving it around. Instead of blocking in certain areas, like a more traditional painter, once I do my sketch, I start applying paint in pieces because I want to know how this is going to relate to this and how it's going to relate to this, and keep moving the painter around. Taking a different color. Some people talk about the spiral with a center of focus. I don't have a center of focus. My interest is not that. I say that I want the whole symphony in one painting. It's not an issue of exactly how representational it is. What the still life would be for me today is just the inspiration and a diving board, a place to start at, to jump off. So you will find that my painting has a lot more activity. And like the color field painters, it's far more on the surface as opposed to depth. I'm not dealing with a lot of three-dimensional depth. I'm dealing with color moving across the page. If you know art history, paintings or painters originally began trying to illustrate, not early on, but during the Middle Ages, really get the sense of depth. There are several ways to achieve perspective. I am a believer in traditional training. I think if you want to distort things, then you really need to understand them in order to do it. So if you were going to paint a house, you want to understand what happens with perspective. Otherwise, it's just going to be off if you're painting a street, a village. But there are several ways to achieve a sense of depth. One is the values of your paint. Another, you can achieve depth by using horizontal bands that get closer and closer. Whoops, like a train track. But you'll see my painting tends to be more in the surface. So I'm getting a bit off track. This applies more to landscapes. But I'm going to start my own painting now. This still life could be painted horizontally or vertically. I'm going to paint it vertically. A vertical painting tends to have more excitement to it. And it's what I want to do. I want to make use of the tall vase. You'll see how I'm going to lead people around. So my first step is going to be to get my base coat on the painting. For this, you can use a rag. I don't like to paint on white. A lot of painters will stain their board in order to create a bit of a mid-tone, and that's exactly what I'm doing. But my mid-tone is red, orange, anything in that family. I find it adds excitement to my painting, and that's what I like. It ties into my philosophy that you don't need to see a whole subject in order to understand what it is. That goes back to Ellen Dissanyaki's biobehavioral. From thousands of years standing and seeing horizons, we understand a horizontal line is a horizon line. If we turn the landscape vertically, it tends to be more of a city and more exciting. I don't always use a fan brush, it's just, I happen to have it here. So, I'm going to take some of my Prussian blue, and I'm going to create my composition. If you're not sure of the direction of a line, hold your brush up to it, and it can tell you. But it's your painting. You can do whatever you want with it. You can change the angles, it doesn't matter. It's your decision, it's your choice. Make it work for you. I want to cut off the edge. Corners are not super important things. You don't want your viewer to get stuck in a corner. So be very conscious. If you put something in a corner, have it there for a reason. If you're using it to balance something. But your center of interest does not want to be in a corner because that's where your viewer will go. Okay, so as you can see, I'm blocking everything in with a brush. Now I'm going to go. From now on, I don't use brushes. Occasionally, if I'm doing a portrait, I need to do something with the eyes, I'll use a brush, but I'm a knife painter. These are the knives I like. It's a palette knife. It has a bent neck, keeps my fingers a little bit out of the paint. If it was flat, I guarantee you my fingers would always have paint on them. I like the shape of it. It's not too wide. It doesn't hold too much paint. I like the sharp edge. You'll see how I use the edges. Edges are extremely important in painting. So now I'm going to start mixing my paints. Move this out of my way. I'm just making use of the liquid that I have here. And I'm going to start with my darks. See, I'm using the edge of the knife, bringing it straight down. So I can draw with the knife. Now, part of the reason I like the ampersand gesso board is I can scratch things into it. I can add details just by scratching. If you're not sure of the value of something and you have your composition finder, take a look at the grayscale on the side of it and hold that up to what you're painting. Hold it up to there and see what the value is. Okay, I'm going to let this drip. Right now, all I'm doing is getting paint on my board. Okay, I'm sorry. Going back to why I like the gesso board, I did mention I can scrape into it. To get my blacks, I use my Prussian blue and my purple dioxazine, and very often I add red. I am going to allow this to stay light because I may want to enhance the oranges that are in that painting. Okay, I'm going to pick up on that orange. I don't have a lot of orange in my painting. Okay, this is all shadow area. This is all shadow on the side of this vase. And now I'm going to pick up some of that blue, and I purposely have the vase facing in that direction so I can move that blue. And now I'm going to pick up some of that dark down over here in this corner. And now I'm going to look for where I can pick up over here. Well, all right, my darks are up here. Now I'm going to add some zinc, and I'm going to make myself some good dark gray. Basically, I'm going to mix a bunch of these paintings. I do have the Portland gray here. I'm not really going to use it right now. At the end of the day, if you take all of your colors and mix them together, you'll find that you're going to make gray. I don't carry brown paint. I don't carry green paint. I find the Prussian blue, the cobalt, act just fine, okay? So here's a brown. As I'm mixing, if I want to apply some of this color, I'm going to throw it in here, here. As I said, right now, I am just getting paint on my surface. I know it's going to dry. I just need paint on. I'm going to allow the red and orange. I know that's not very gray, but you'll see. Okay, I'm going to pick up the shadow from the vase. And on that side, basically what I'm doing is making notes to myself, getting my values in. I am going to allow some of the red and orange in my background to show. Okay. Okay, so there are lots of shades of gray. If you take a look at what I have going on, I have some brown which I'm going to move over because I'm going to use that for around the frame. This is a very soft, it's getting very purple. I'm going to use that for the shadow behind the vase here. And I'm going to use it to here. Okay. What you should note is every time you go to a different place, the humidity or the dryness in the air is going to affect your painting and your medium. So I want some of this color back here. Okay. I'm going to put aside some of this gray because it has some purple in it that I like. And now I'm going to add some yellow to make it more green. I want some more green in it and a little bit here because the table actually has a lot of green in the gray. Now what you'll find is that I am moving my colors all around. A little bit of that greenish gray there, I'm going to pick up in it over here. I'm going to pick up on it on the wall here. And back here. My paint tends to stay on the surface. What I give up by not painting a more three-dimensional painter is a kind of consistency that happens, a coherency. I don't build shapes, I move color. So my interest in the movement of color came about actually in the 70s. I went to art school, but basically attended for a year. I started out, I decided my first year, I just want to draw. I want to learn the colors of black and white. So all I did was draw. I got invited to have a show at the Boston Atheneum because of the show, which actually were quite traditional representational drawings. They had a bit of a graphic design compositional edge to them, but they were all the shades of gray and eggs and windows. That's all I painted, and that's what was in the show. Because of the show, I was invited into a gallery in Manhattan. By the time that happened, I had actually transitioned to non-objective work. But starting my second year in college, I had a full-time job about an hour outside of the city. So I would basically do my art at night. At the Boston Museum School, back in the early 70s, we did not have to attend classes. Basically, you would bring your portfolio in at the end of the semester, and they would give you credit based on the work you did. So I would work during the day at this job, and then I'd go home at night and make art. But I had transitioned to non-objective. I was trained to paint very contemporary New York style art. So my interest was color field. Rothko was one of my favorite painters, and to this day is my favorite painter, or continues to be one of them. I love large paintings. I started out really where I learned how to paint was painting theater sets and then murals. So I would much rather paint a 5-foot painting than a small painting. Give me a roller, give me a huge brush, give me a broom, anything will do. But my interest, and I'm sure it's because I was traveling an hour to work each day and back, was that everything was moving. And it's pretty consistent with our era. We live in a very fast-moving time. Not much stands still. My heart still throbs when I see a beautiful classical painting or a much more representational painting, but my own interest actually lies more in the surface. How am I going to connect this color to this color to this color and create a sense of the fact that time doesn't stand still. Everything that we see, it's here today, gone tomorrow, or most things. This applies even more so in nature. But I will get back to work. And I'm using the colors I have here, and I'm just going to lighten them a bit as I go. Where can I put that? It's the same color family. So I'm running into a bit of a problem in that I was so liberal with the Gamsol-Alkyd mix that it's dripping all over the place. Now, what you're going to need to do is learn to step back. I'll create my edges and define things later. Right now, I'm still at the point where I just want to get paint onto my palette. Stepping back allows you to see what it is you're painting. I think, just so we have a greater sense of what's going on, I'm going to throw some of my lights. I've got my midtones, I've got my darks. What I don't have are some of the lights. Now these lights here, the flower there, it's a much warmer light. I'm using the titanium white because I want the strength of it. These are, it's called color notes. Note to myself where I'm going to place things. Actually, I'm going to move this flower over a little bit. I want that flower there. I want to use it as a device. And that device is going to be to step from these flowers here to help here up to here. And I will pick up, I mentioned keeping more of the orange in there. I'm going to pick up some lights where I can to help the viewer come back down. I will pick up some light in here, not white. But that's just a note, because I'm going to want the viewer to come back down. I'll pick up light here. Of course, it won't be white, it will be yellow. You know, a yellow mix, okay? Step back every now and then. When a viewer sees your painting, they're going to see it from 15 feet away at first glance. You want to know what it is. You also, when you're 2 feet from a painting, you can't really see what's going on. So step back and take a look so you can make your corrections before you get too far. Do I want to bring this frame up? How high do I want to bring it here? What's going to happen up here? Do I want that amount of dead space? Okay? If this is the same exact size as that and that, equal measurements are going to make for a bit much more boring painting. So in stepping back, I'm realizing that I really need to deal with the value here because this bright is totally distracting. So I'm going to take some of my blue, mix it with some of the gray here, and the white, and get the shadow on that vase to the mid-tone that I want. And I want to push the sense of gold behind it, so I'm going to pull in my orange and my yellows. And I'm going to hold it up and take a look to see if this is the right color. Is this deep enough for the shadow on the frame? It's not. Where does this color match? Well, it matches up above here. I could throw some of it in here while I have it on my knife. If I'm going to throw it in here, I'm going to throw some in here, and I'm going to throw some in here. Even if it's not there, just for the sake of moving your viewer's eye, I'm going to pick some up here. You'll see at the end how some of these colors remain and are used. So I need that to be a darker. In fact, I want to have more green into it. That's pretty good. I'm going to use it now. If you see, I'm using the edge of my knife to cut and create the edge of the vase. I am not worried. In fact, I might end up leaving that touch of blue there because there's a bit of reflection in the frame from the vase that actually pull some blue into the frame. So I'm going to pull some over here while I'm talking about it. I'm going to eventually elongate the vase, and now I get to sketch in on this beautiful gesso board. Because it's so smooth, I don't have any problem with the texture of the canvas hindering where my sketch is. And I'm going to now better define my painting. I need to get paint on the painting before I do that. I think I'll move this over here. I want to pull up some orangey red into the side, orangey yellow, some gold. Pull some light into the side of my frame. Now I talked about not having the viewer come in and hit a wall in composition. This viewer is going to end up coming in here and coming in here and going around that wall, and I will make a path with the use of color. I'm going to pick up some of the orange right now in the oranges that's in the painting. And I want to remind myself about the reflected light that's down here from the frame as it hits the table. It's a good color here. This works for my golds. Remember I said I was not going to keep that white. I'm not. It's a marker, it's a note to myself to get light in here. Now, since I've chosen the vertical format, I am changing the shape of the painting that's there in the background, in the still life. I will adjust the shapes to work with my format that I've chosen. I'm just going to clean my knife a little bit and scrape up some of the paint from my palette. So in terms of moving that viewer past that wall that's created here, I'm taking some of this color and helping to pull it down here. It will help bring the viewer. It's actually down there because there's a lot of that gold reflecting on the table. I know this looks like a huge mess right now. It will come together. It's definitely more messy looking than if I built from shapes, but I'm building by layering color. Okay, I want to get some of the whites in. Generally, you build light upon dark. I know the vase has more green in the shadows, but I want to put the green on top of a more purple color to help accentuate it. The flowers up above are much cooler in temperature than the flowers below, so I'm going much more blue in here for the shadow areas. Now I am turning my knife around in a lot of different directions intentionally. If you have a triangular shape, it acts as an arrow. Okay? The way I look at shapes within my painting, since they're about activity, I use shapes. A square basically is a stopping point, a resting point. It holds the viewer. A circle would be a target. Okay? I'm going to scrape these down. I'm going to carve the edge of the vase by using, the edge of my knife, okay? Eventually you'll see that it will pull forward. The vase will sort of come out. For me, it's like a carnival every time I go to paint. It's fun, it's new, and it's joyful. I love painting with a palette knife. Initially, I started painting plein air. I can go right from my palette onto the canvas without worrying about blending colors. I can intentionally blend them. Once you get used to the knife, you learn at times you want to add 2 or 3 colors, get a bit of a rainbow effect within a tiny section. The knife will allow you to do it once you learn how, but it's just intense color. And I like being bold. I think by nature I tend to be more timid, so maybe this is my alter ego coming out. Painting the way I do, my paintings are less about texture and they're more about what would be referred to as broken color by people that want to use words to help define things and to help understand things. If I want something smooth, I'll take the knife and make a big swath of color, but you'll find most often I don't portray the texture. If I'm talking about foliage, I'm usually talking about these color splotches and shapes, more about the texture of it. In my painting, I have the knife texture all over, as opposed to portraying a representation of the specific texture of the object. My main hope and desire is that there's a greater understanding as to what goes into playing with color and the reasons for it. And I just hope it helps to free some people to be able to see this and know that, hey, it's okay to paint differently. Follow your heart. Learn what you need to learn. It's just great if people can understand we all have our own way of seeing, our own way of doing, and more importantly than that, we have our own way of where we want to go and what we get out of what we do.
Well, that is a brand new video. It's called Still Life with Palette Knife with Cynthia Rosen, and you can learn more about the new release, the full video, at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code for you today only, and it's in the comments section. Now let's get right to our interview with Cynthia Rosen.
Given my age and where I'm at, when somebody asks me when I started to paint, it's sort of an interesting but tricky question. I painted in high school. I used to retreat to my room, I'd hide in my room, and I would paint. I'd sit on my bed and I'd paint. I got a free ride to college. I never painted in college. I just drew. And after my first year in college, I actually worked full-time and set up art programs in halfway houses and jails and alternative schools. Did a lot of drawing and did mixed media at night on my own, would take my portfolio, get the credits. Oddly and regretfully, it was when I left college that I wanted to paint. I wanted to learn how to paint. I look back now and say, wow, I wasted that opportunity to learn from painting instructors. But I'm pretty much a self-learner, so I decided I'm going to learn to paint. I got a fellowship, a traveling fellowship from the museum in Boston, and decided I would sit on an island in northern Norway where there's light 24 hours a day, and I would teach myself to paint. So I took a bunch of paper, gessoed paper, and some paints, and sat on the island for 6 weeks. Came back to the States, painted traditional landscapes for a couple of years. Moved to Florida, and I didn't really like the landscape, so I painted clouds. But I still loved color field painting, so I would do these 5-foot, partly stained, partly painted images of clouds as if you're totally immersed in the cloud. Technically, I was painting, but it was a whole different kind of painting. After that, when I had children, I just decided I can't make art. There was no way I could be the kind of mother I wanted to be and have the focus for making art, so I taught. When I returned to painting, it was doing theater sets, and that's really where I learned how to paint. I painted on 30-foot walls. And that was not very long ago. Maybe I'm talking 9 years ago. So I did some murals for a couple of years and decided I would go back to making art professionally. Started to paint plein air because I was living in a small apartment in Arizona, no space there. So I bought some equipment, started to go outside, and discovered that I loved to paint. Came back to making art at this point only about 6 years ago, doing it professionally. Following your heart entails being brave, knowing that you're probably going to swim upstream depending where you live. If you're living in a more conservative area and your friends are more conservative painters, they're going to say, well, I don't understand it. Why aren't you painting this way? So following your heart, it just means being brave. It means knowing that in certain places, certain times, you're going to swim upstream. If you love beautiful, super traditional painting, go for it. I had a beautiful romantic painter once say to me, I'd like to paint more like you. And my response, because my painting tends to be a bit more expressionistic, some people think more abstract, my response was, but you'll lose the romance in your painting. So you make decisions, what it is you like. I love beautiful romantic paintings, but it's not one in my nature right now. It was a number of years ago. When I first learned to paint, I was incredibly traditional. I went to the Boston Museum School. I had gotten a free ride, a fellowship to go there. And I walked in thinking that art was nothing but beautiful. Now, I do bemoan the fact that in our society now, very often, a pile of trash in the room can be considered art. I conceptually understand it. I don't feel it's great for society. We lose our sense of ideals if anything is looked upon as being great art. I think art helps raise our ideals of society. But with that said, I went to the museum school. I walked into a drawing class. I decided my first year, I explored photography and printmaking and graphic design and sculpture. I walked into a painting studio to learn how to stretch a canvas and never went back. I tried ceramics. It was wonderful. In that day and age, you could walk into any studio and explore. But I decided I just wanted to draw. I wanted to learn the colors of black and white. I walked into the drawing studio, and one of the drawing instructors was very traditional, And that was great. We would do these long figure model poses and drawings. The other drawing studio I walked into, and the instructor was making triangles on the page and a lot of motion. And I just didn't get it. I thought it was ugly. How could you take the beautiful human form and transpose it into a triangle and a square? Did not understand it. Walked out of the class really upset. But I was so upset, I decided the next day I'm going back. He was hired there because he's got something to teach, and I needed to understand it. You know, you sort of, in the process of learning art, you want to learn what you don't know. I'm sure they didn't hire, the teacher's name was Bill Flynn. I'm sure he wasn't hired because he was a bad teacher. Went back in, and I got it. And actually, it's partly because of him that my interest is what it is today. I totally get it. And from it, I probably learned the most important lesson, and that is the simplification of shapes. I would go back to that class every day, and I would learn to draw really quickly, and I would understand it was a quicker and easier way for me to get proportions. So that's how my painting today begins. I start with simple shapes, and my interest is the dynamics of the structure. Whether it's a still life, whether it's a figure, whether it's painting plein air or in the studio, my interest is the composition and the dynamics of it. And when I move color around, it's because I like how things move. I love the Impressionists. I love color. I love the Expressionists and their boldness. But if you want to paint in a different way, know that you have to be bold and brave. Find what your passion is and follow your heart and do what you need to do to get there. If you're taking a course and you paint differently than the instructor, let the instructor know what your interest is. Advocate for yourself. You may have chosen that instructor because they have something to teach you about color, but how they structure a painting can be totally different than how you want to structure yours. So be brave. Follow your heart. I woke up one morning wanting to let go of the traditional drawing that I had been doing for years and venture into this other world. In terms of the expressive, I think that this other world sent me towards color field work, abstract constructions. I did mixed media. I didn't really paint. I might use stains on canvas, but then I would juxtapose them to sprayed satin. So I would do mixed media pieces, and I would do spray paint and pastel. And my work became much more abstract. When I started to paint again, or when I started to paint more traditionally, I found that some of my old interests were peeking through. How it happens, I don't know. It's in me. It's when you learn a new language and you become familiar with it, you tend to use it. So this was a language I learned, a visual language that just became a part of me. When I drive down the road or when I look at a beautiful still life, I see that beautiful still life the way it is. I've discovered a love of color. I grew up in a very formal and beige home, and when I moved to Vermont and raised a family, beige and browns were what I was used to. I mean, we built our house basically around ourselves. We had built the shell, and we had white walls, and we had brick, and we had brown. and everything was neutral. And I think when I started to paint, actually before I started to paint, I remember we needed to replace the carpet. And all of a sudden it's like, I want color in my life. We got a colorful carpet and I loved it. And then I had to replace the wood floor. And I replaced it with a purple floor and I painted the walls red. So this has been happening over time, that all of a sudden I've discovered the joy of color. And when it comes to my painting, it's like a bit of an explosion of color. And for me, it's like a carnival every time I go to paint. It's fun, it's new, and it's joyful. The first time I painted in Arizona, there was a chocolate festival. I had read in the paper there was going to be a chocolate festival in Glendale, Arizona, and they were coupling a plein air event with it. And I didn't know what plein air was at the time. But, chocolate sounds great, and painting outside sounds great. And all I did, I went to Michael's, I picked up a bunch of, a little cheap set of acrylics. I bought a folding chair, took a bottle of water and a canvas, and I started to paint with acrylics and discovered that before you could get the acrylic off the palette in 90-degree heat, they dry. So my very first painting was with acrylics. Then I went and I bought 4 colors of oil paint. I had been given a gift certificate by my sisters as a birthday gift to Jerry's Artorama. A year later, I decided I'd use it, and I bought a French easel, bought some brushes and a couple of little canvas boards, and that's when I started to paint plein air. At this point, I had had the experience with the acrylic. I had some red acrylic. I stained my boards with yellow. I stained another board with blue. I stained it with red. I know I don't like working on a white surface. And out in Arizona, the yellow, it's like not having any color. The blue, which would have been my inclination back east, was too dark because the molecules of paint bounce against the surface. I was not getting enough light in my painting with a dark blue background. I loved the red. I had 4 tubes of blue paint, a tube of white, a tube of transparent orange, and a tube of alizarin crimson. And that's what I had bought from my oil paints. And I went out, and those were the colors I started with. I found some other people that painted plein air. I joined some plein air Facebook sites. I learned a lot about color. Picked up the palette knife because my paintings were more staid and traditional than what I wanted. I wanted greater freedom. I wanted to learn about color more. And that's the beginning of the end. It's why I'm where I am today. It's all because of painting in Arizona that I needed the oil paints because everything else dried so quickly. Occasionally, I will paint with watercolor. I love watercolor. I don't travel with it. I don't like doing plein air events with it because I won't carry glass. I did that back when I was doing mixed media. Most of my work was framed under glass because it had pastel. And I like pastel, but I'm in love with oil. I'm a messy painter, so painting with oil, at times you just have to be careful. Painting watercolor, you can basically wash out of your clothes, maybe some color, not so well, but I basically sort of joke that I have two sets of clothes, one that will have one that has paint, and one that will have paint. Oil paint's a bit messy. If you have to transport it, you have to have it dry. Painting out west, in the southwest, the painting's dry within a day or two, and it's actually a problem painting with a palette knife. In that way, painting with a brush when you're out in the southwest or in a very warm climate or dry climate, painting with a knife's problematic. Painting with a brush, you can come back the next day, 2 days later, 3 days later. Painting with a knife, you have a lot of texture, so it becomes problematic. But I love being able to push paint around, which you can do with oil paint. With watercolor, you can do a lot of dripping and splattering, but transporting them or showing them, nowadays varnish is becoming more acceptable for watercolors. And in fact, I know, I remember listening to Antonio Massi talking about hoping that the Watercolor Society will, in the not too distant future, accept watercolors that are not under glass. For now it's under glass. I don't want to deal with glass. Eventually, will I go to water-based oils? Very likely, just because the ease of transporting, because I do paint a lot in different parts of the country. Maybe we'll be going internationally as well. But I just love oil for now. I don't really have a painting that I'm most proud of. I have certain paintings that I really like. You'll find that painting, most of your paintings, you probably won't really like. Some you learn a lot of things from, maybe 30% you'll like, maybe 10% you'll really like. I was painting in Virginia and this beautiful scene in front of me, and I was actually right near the back of my car. I had an easel set up near my car. And there was another painter out in the field within speaking distance. And I turned to take a look where the other painter was. And I'm working at this point, I think I was working on an 18 by 24 inch painting. I turned around to look at the other painter, and the light, it was probably 6:37 in the morning. The morning light behind the other painter on the hill was unbelievable. I quickly ran, opened the trunk of my car, got into my car. I laid out 3 canvases. I mean, they're not canvas, they're boards. I think a 12 by 16 and 2 little tiny ones. And I just quickly turned around, and one of my favorite paintings, actually both of the little ones sold, were these little tiny paintings that maybe had 6 strokes on them, but totally caught that light. Morning light, evening light. Maybe you have 6 to 10 minutes to capture that perfect light. And those little paintings, they were small. They were 6 by 8 inch. They captured it. They turned out better than the 18 by 24 that I had been working on for an hour. And the 12 by 16 also sold. I mean, that was a good painting. But out in California this past winter, I was going up the coast. One of my favorite paintings again. I did several that I liked because I don't often get to the Pacific coast in that gorgeous turquoise water. It's a treat for somebody who lives in landlocked states. Real treat. I did a small painting, once again, just a quickie because I'm dodging rain. And it's not that the colors were super, but the strokes just happened by magic. I do say there's a little bit of, I refer to it as magic. There are sometimes things happen. When you go and you want to paint the most perfect painting, forget it, it doesn't work that way. you don't always get that perfect painting. In fact, rarely do you get it. So it's just this little bit of extra something that makes those paintings happen. It can be a momentary inspiration. I have several paintings I like. I have a large painting, 40 by 60 that I'm working on in my studio. It doesn't look as good in the photo as it does in the painting. But I love it. It's based on a bunch of trees and a scene that I had photographed. It's not a plein air painting. I had been driving, hoping to do more plein air paintings on this trip up in Olympic Peninsula this past winter. And I didn't realize how large the peninsula was. You know, back east, you can drive anywhere within a short period of time. Out west and the northwest, the drives are much longer. I didn't get to paint on site, but I took some photos, and there was a scene I loved. I brought it back. I have that painting on my easel. I love that painting. I have another painting that many more people will ooh and ah over because it's much more dramatic. It's another Western scene. But the one I like is not necessarily the one everybody else likes. It just worked. So the paintings I like are some of those that just sort of painted themselves.
That's Cynthia Rosen. She's a good friend of mine. She's a terrific lady, and she's a rock star painter. I love to watch her energy. I stumbled into her in the woods one day. She's painting this giant painting out there with palette knife. I think she was there for about 3 days. It was really fun to watch her. Anyway, you can learn more about her new full-length video. It's called Still Life with Palette Knife with Cynthia Rosen. You can find it at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, there's a special discount code today only for that video. Well, thank you for watching. I want to remind you, if you're new to us, we're here every day at 3 p.m. and we're offering you a free video. It's called 97 Amazing Painting Secrets from the World's Best Artist. It's $200 value, and you can get yours free at 97tips.com. Thanks for watching today. I'm Eric Rhodes.
For me, it's like a carnival every time I go to paint. It's fun, it's new, and it's joyful. I love painting with a palette knife. Initially, I started painting plein air. I can go right from my palette onto the canvas without worrying about blending colors. I can intentionally blend them. Once you get used to the knife, you learn at times you want to add 2 or 3 colors, get a bit of a rainbow effect within a tiny section. The knife will allow you to do it once you learn how, but it's just intense color. And I like being bold. I think by nature, I tend to be more timid, so maybe this is my alter ego coming out. Painting the way I do, my paintings are less about texture and they're more about what would be referred to as broken color by people that want to use words to help define things and to help understand things. If I want something smooth, I'll take the knife and make a big swath of color. But you'll find most often I don't portray the texture. If I'm talking about foliage, I'm usually talking about these color splotches and shapes, more about the texture of it. In my painting, I have the knife texture all over, as opposed to portraying a representation of the specific texture of the object. My main hope and desire is that there's a greater understanding as to what goes into playing with color and the reasons for it. And I just hope it helps to free some people to be able to see this and know that, hey, it's okay to paint differently. Follow your heart. Learn what you need to learn. It's just great if people can understand we all have our own way of seeing, our own way of doing, and more importantly than that, we have our own way of where we want to go and what we get out of what we do.